Hello everyone, and welcome back to Recent Stuff I Liked, I guess. So, I'm recording this literally right after recording the Sonic 2 one, so I have no idea what the reception to that has been like. In actuality, it probably got no fucking reception whatsoever. But we're rolling through with this now, I guess. Knowing my upload schedule, you're probably hearing this months ahead of me recording it. So, hello everyone from the 18th of April 2022. Hello, welcome, hi, welcome to the past. Hi, hello from the past. Hi, hello. I'm here to talk about the Cuphead Show today, which came out back in February. And you know what? I'm just gonna dive right in. I don't need to do a big long intro or anything like that. I'm just gonna jump right into my thoughts on the Cuphead Show. And I gotta say, this thing is a delight. I loved the Cuphead Show so much. I mean, I'm already a massive fan of Cuphead the game. It was one of the first few really difficult games. Well, I mean, some would argue whether it even is that difficult a game. But I feel like for a lot of people, it's a different game. Like a difficult game, rather. Like, by the reputation it's garnered, it's safe to say that it's considered difficult, and for good reason, I believe. But it was the first difficult game that I remember really pushing through to the end to make sure I beat. I nearly gave up multiple times. It's like I've completed many a game, granted a lot of them being like Mario games and shit like that. But I've never really completed a game that's like, you know, really challenging for a lot of people. And I nearly gave up so many times, but I pushed through to the end until I beat the devil, and I'm so glad I did, because Cuphead is now one of my favourite games of all time. I've got it on multiple platforms now. I've beaten through it like 3 times now. I'm like, as someone who loves animation and who studied animation, I could gush about the game's visuals forever. As someone who also quite likes jazz and big band music, I could also just gush about the music forever as well. Everything about Cuphead is, like I say, it's one of my favourite games of all time. I love it so much. So naturally, when I found out that they were making a show that was going to be on Netflix about it, I mean, I was ecstatic. I was so hyped. I thought this is going to be so much fun. And considering the fact that Cuphead is based on a generation of cartoons, granted a very old generation of cartoons, like giving it a cartoon, like an actual show, it makes perfect sense. Like it was just a logical direction to take Cuphead as a franchise in. Obviously, as of recording this, we've got Cuphead the game, came out in 2017. We've got the first season of the Cuphead show that came out this year. We still haven't got the Delicious Last Course DLC. That's coming out in June, I believe. And as of yet, I don't think we have a date on the release of Season 2 just yet. But that's all good, because, I mean, we're here to talk about the first season. And what a first season it was. Yeah, so much fun. So it follows a very simple structure, you know, just like in the games. Cuphead and Mugman are living with Elder Kettle. He's like watching over them. I don't know if he's like their adoptive father or something like that. But it literally is just like a little slice of life comedy about Cuphead and Mugman and the adventures they get up to on a day-to-day basis. That's it. There's no big grand overarching story. There's no like deep hidden lore that's gradually being chipped away at over the course of the series. I mean, they may go in that direction, and I'd be perfectly fine with that, but as it stands now, it literally is just the misadventures of 2 boys living on a magical island inhabited by a load of wacky cartoon characters. And personally, I think that was the perfect direction to take this in. It doesn't, you know, bother itself with and tie itself down with trying to, you know, give itself those explicit connections to the game. You know, it doesn't bog itself down with trying to establish events that, like, lead up to the events of the game, or, like, make it clear that they take place in the same universe and there's, like, a canon that it's abiding by or anything like that. Like, the universe of the game and the universe of the show, they're very much their own things. And I can see some people being disappointed by that. Personally, I think that was probably the best way to do it. You know, just take these characters that people like with their wacky world of more crazy characters, just throw them into some fun slice of life stories and chuck 12 of them out on Netflix and let people enjoy them. And yeah, I think the final thing turned out great. Now, not a lot of people agree with me that this setup was the best thing to go for. I'd recommend checking out this video by the Alpha J Show about a lot of the criticism that the Cuphead show got. Basically, because this is an animated property that came out on Netflix in the year of our Lord 2022, and there isn't some grand overarching story, there is no great mystery or deep lore that's gradually being established and hinted at over the course of a series or anything like that. It literally is just like the slice of life cartoons of old. It got a lot of criticism for that. It got a lot of criticism for not being that deep, not really having a lot of substance to it, and, you know, I couldn't disagree more with that criticism, and I'm going to explain why. So, it is true that it is not that deep in the sense of what it's trying to do. It is true that there isn't a whole lot to it outside of just some fun slice-of-life adventures, and it is basically just doing how cartoons of old used to handle it. But that's kind of the whole point of it, and I mean, maybe I'm reading a little bit too deep into this, but here's what I got from it personally. So a big thing with Cuphead, not just the show, but the game as well, is the nostalgia. You know, there is a lot of nostalgia for those old cartoons, despite it being a very far gone era, you know, almost 100 years ago now. Despite how long it's been, there is a lot of nostalgia for all that old-timey, you know, rubber hose animation, and the influence it had on animation that we still see and feel to this day, it's unparalleled. It's unparalleled. Like, I studied animation in college, and we learned about stuff like, you know, the 12 principles of animation, and so much about that can be traced back to this era of animation. Going on a little bit of a tangent there, but basically a big part of the theming is the nostalgia. You know, there's a lot of, like, imagery and just factors about the game's visuals that really do harken back to not even cartoons as far back as the 90s and not even just cartoons that go back as far as the 20s and 30s, even ones from, like, the 50s, 60s, and 70s that you'd be more familiar with, stuff like Tom and Jerry and Looney Tunes and stuff like that. So it does lean very heavily on that nostalgia factor. That's a very important part of the Cuphead experience. And I think with the show, it's absolutely no different, but in a slightly different way. So obviously we can take a look at even just one screenshot of the game, and you can see that it is, you know, basically trying to do the 1920s and 1930s animation style, but in the modern day. And the commitment they made to that for the game is astounding. They made all the sprites and all the artwork, none of it's digital, it's all completely hand-drawn in the exact same techniques they would have used back in the day to make those cartoons, and it's painstakingly accurate. The level of effort and detail that went into the visuals of this game, again, I could gush about it for a year straight. It's like nothing I've ever seen. Now, for the actual show, they went in a different direction, and that's perfectly fair, because if they tried to do the exact same thing for the show, then it probably wouldn't even be half done now. Like, and this got announced like 2 years ago. Like, it wouldn't even be half done now because it's such a long process. Instead, they opted for a more modern and digital animation style. Like, it's not done analog, it's all digital, unlike the visuals of the game, but with an actual style of character design and background design and animation that doesn't really, again, emulate the 1920s and 30s Max Fleischer Studios style, but more just, like, harkens to it and is based upon it, loosely based. It's like a love letter to it, basically. The whole thing is like a love letter to those cartoons of old, where it's not emulating them like Cuphead the game did, but is more just doing something new with it and basing it off of that, if that makes sense. So in terms of how that ties back to the whole nostalgia thing, rather than being steeped in the visuals, it's steeped in the plots. The Cuphead show would fit in perfectly on the lineup of, say, Nicktoons in, like, 2004. Like, this show harkens back to the cartoons of old as well, but rather than the old Rubber Hose Max Fleischer animation from the 1920s and 1930s, it instead, rather than focusing on the visual department, focuses on the writing and plot department to harken back to the cartoons that we all would have been watching on, say, Boomerang, Nickelodeon, and Cartoon Network in the 90s and the 2000s. So yes, the plots are basic, and they aren't all that deep, and a lot of them are quite contrived. No, not contrived, that's the wrong word. Oh, what's the word? I don't know what the word is. I don't think contrived is even similar to that. But basically, plots that have already been done a shitload before, like the plot of Baby Bottle. It's a plot we've all seen loads of times, and there's multiple episodes that are exactly the same as that in that respect. They've been done to death before by other cartoons, but again, I feel like that's kind of the point. Because again, a big part of Cuphead's appeal is that nostalgia factor, and even with the show, it's harping on the nostalgia of those cartoons that we all used to watch as kids in the 90s and the 2000s. It's emulating their style, it's even copying over some of the more recurring plots that you would have seen in shows back then. And I don't think it really is as simple as a show being lazy and not doing anything new and not doing anything all that deep. I really do think and feel like it is part of this whole collective nostalgia-based experience where it harkens back from all these familiar elements and brings them together in a package that's not only super charming and beautiful to look at, but really takes you back to a bygone era of animation, just like Cuphead the game did, but in a much different way. And even though, sure, it's not that deep and not something as super intensive and intricate as, say, something like, I don't know, a modern cartoon that's very story-driven, but I think the elements that it brings together to harken back to that bygone era of cartoons, it's still a very valuable experience, and the feeling that you get off it is so warm and familiar and comfortable and nostalgic that even if, yeah, it's not exactly treading over much new ground, it's still a wonderful experience that just feels so pleasing to take in, you know? And it's not like the visual department even suffered. Again, the animation here is stellar, from all the character designs to how expressive they are to their movements. It once again definitely does harken back to the Max Fleischer era of rubber hose animation, but it's done in such a fun and amazing way to watch on screen. Again, this is only my second attempt at doing these non-scripted videos. I'm still not the best at this. My wording's not going to be the most eloquent thing in the world. But I hope you get what I mean, in the sense that even though I did just go on that, make that whole point about how, you know, the plots and everything, and how the animation obviously isn't quite on the same level as Cuphead the game, it's still nothing to be sniffed at, because again, it looks gorgeous, and the influences from Fleischer era animation is still very clear. They still really play around with the fast and loose rules of that kind of animation, and like it's breathtaking to look at. Obviously nowhere near on the level as the game, but it still looks phenomenal. And even just the little details that help reinforce the whole 90s and 2000s cartoons nostalgia that I was talking about. So many little details, such as, I don't know if anyone else has clocked this, just little details like how even in different scenes, the characters that are very much 2D, and while there would be no place for them normally, still have a very subtle drop shadow behind them to emulate cell-based animation from the 90s, when characters would be drawn on animation cells and put on top of the background, giving the subtle drop shadow that we see in, for example, old episodes of The Simpsons, where it's like, even though you're looking at 2D characters in a 2D space, there's still a subtle drop shadow behind them because of the nature of animating with cells. And they emulate that here by putting a subtle drop shadow behind each of the characters here. And it's just little touches like that that really bring it together and just make it such a charming experience to watch. And speaking of charm, the characters here, they absolutely nailed it. Like Cuphead and Mugman, their voices are exactly how you'd expect them to sound. I love the sort of like New Yorker twinge they got going on, the whole sort of "hey man, I'm walking here" thing they've got with going on with their voice. I don't know if it's what I would have expected, but it is really charming and I like it a lot. And in terms of bringing stuff over from the games into the show, again, they don't get too bogged down with making them perfectly linked together. They play around with them and do their own thing with them, and it's great. I love the devil. The devil in this show is so damn charming. From his voice to his mannerisms to how weirdly obsessed he is with just grabbing Cuphead's soul at all costs, and his just weird his weird just pleasure he gets from just taking people's souls in these absurd ways, and it's such a joy to watch play out. It's disappointing that King Dice was only in one episode. I really hope we do see more of him. He was his translation from the game to the show was mwah, absolutely perfect. Like, Roll the Dice probably is the best episode of this first season. It's got so many funny Cuphead moments, funny Mugman moments. King Dice himself is just electric, from his animation to his voice acting. Everything about that episode, Roll the Dice. I mean, I love all these episodes, but Roll the Dice, man, that was easily the best episode of that first season, by far, 100%. I love that episode. And even the little nods to the bosses from the actual game and different characters from the game. Like, we get, who do we see in the game? Well, this isn't really a boss, but we see Porkrind running Porkrind's Emporium. He's kind of like a Squidward-ish character who gets annoyed by the SpongeBob and Patrick that are Cuphead and Mugman. But obviously they don't hammer it home too much to the point where it becomes annoying. They hit a really good balance with it. They don't make Cuphead and Mugman flat out insufferable, and they don't make Porkrind too mean or anything like that. It just makes for some great comedy scenes. And we see bosses such as, we see Grim Matchstick in an episode. I'm drawing a blank on who else we see in the actual show, even though I've watched through this so many times. But even in the opening credits, we see like Captain Brinybeard, Cala Maria, Grim Matchstick, and even in the actual show, there's so many just subtle visual nods to stuff in the game that really didn't need to be there and don't enhance it in any way, but just the fact that they are there and they don't feel forced in, they don't feel like they were crammed in, they don't stop the narrative just to draw attention to the fact that they're shoving a reference in there. It's woven in so organically, and if anything, just adds to the awesome and beautiful, magically creative visuals they've got going on. Like, seriously, both the Cuphead game and show are just gold mines for great visuals. Like, if you're a sucker for great animation, if you like yourself a nice dollop of animation porn, you're gonna love these two properties. Animation porn sounds like a completely different thing to what I'm talking about, and I'm never gonna say those words out loud again, but I'm hoping you get the point. And yeah, I don't think there's all that much left to say. I'm looking at the length of my Audacity recording now, and this is significantly shorter than the one I just did for Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Thank God, because that one turned out way longer than I wanted it to, and I haven't even got to editing that one yet. But yeah, the Cuphead show, I couldn't be happier with how it turned out, and I think the criticism that it's got for the approach that it took to its storytelling was completely unfounded and ridiculous, and completely missed what I judge to be at least the point of Cuphead in general. I mean, obviously the point of Cuphead is to be like a really intense and difficult run and gun and boss fighting shoot 'em up game, but in terms of like the artistic merit of Cuphead, if that makes sense, or at least what I derive from it. But yeah, super charming characters, gorgeous animation, a magical sense of nostalgia that just drips from every orifice of this thing. It's absolutely brilliant, and I cannot wait for more Cuphead show. That second season cannot come soon enough. I'm not the biggest fan about how they ended the season off with a cliffhanger ripped straight from Rick and Morty, but hey, I'm all for it. I'm all for it, and I mean, they've got me wondering what that first episode is going to be like of season 2. That it's got me wondering how they are gonna resolve that. You know what? That is another thing as well. It would have been very easy for them to go episodic, like, you know, really commit to that 90s, 2000s slice of life approach to cartoons I was talking about. They could have very easily done that, and for the most part they do. Most of the episodes, things like Baby Bottle, Dangerous Mugman, all that sort of stuff, they are episodic, but there is continuity from episode to episode, specifically the ones involving the devil, you know, from Carnival at the beginning all the way to the Sweater two-parter near the end. So there is continuity. So while they are doing the whole, 90s and 2000s slice of life approach to cartoons that I praised it for, they did still put their own twist on it, and there is some elements of serialization in there, which I do appreciate. Like, as much as I am singing the praises of the episodic approach that they took, I do like me some serialization in my animation, and I'm glad that there is at least a little bit. It really does help them feel like they're doing their own thing with this show. They're not, like, swaying in one direction or the other. They're not going with one extreme. They're building a great balance of serialization and episodicness, which is a word now, while still sticking to what they're setting out to do in terms of, again, the whole theming of nostalgia, which I think is, again, absolutely perfect, the exact way they should have done it. And to sum up, like I say, I could not be happier with how this thing turned out. If you haven't seen it, go and check it out. It's an absolute joy of a show. Even if you haven't played Cuphead the game, I definitely recommend giving it a shot just to see what you think of it. And if you're watching this right now and you run a channel where you review things like TV shows, movies, whatever, but you haven't tackled the Cuphead show, I'd like you to give it a shot and maybe post a video about it, purely because I'm really interested to know what more people think about this thing, because maybe I'm massively overblowing my praise for this, because to be fair, I am biased. I do love the shit out of Cuphead. I do love the shit out of those characters. So it really would be interesting to hear even more people's thoughts on this thing. But, so, yeah, if you do review media and you haven't tackled the Cuphead show, I definitely advise that you do. One, because I really do think it's worth your time, and two, because I'd be really interested to see what you think. Really? So those are my thoughts on the Cuphead show. Let me know what you thought of both this video and the show in the comments below. I'm genuinely very interested to know. But for now, thank you all so much for watching, all you beautiful people, however many of you there may be, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!